order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, before we get the roll call, I would like to welcome the newest member of our planning commission, Mr. Kevin McKeegan. Kevin, welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And let the roll call show that with the exception of Mr. Moore, all members are in attendance. Next item of business, do we have any comments on our meeting from our February, minutes from our February meeting? All good?
I'll make a motion to approve them as a.
Motion by Mr. Taylor approved,
I'll make them second.
second by Mr. Bloom, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously.
Jackie, I should be noted as abstaining.
Minutes?
Yep.
Sorry, my error, thank
Yeah,
you.
no worries.
Assumption. Okay, next item on our agenda is the Richmond States amendment. So, Mr. Schmidt, are you gonna update us?
Yes.
Mark Schmidt, Hampton Technical Associates. We prepared the plan on behalf of the developer.
Can't hear.
Yep.
Microphone on.
It should be happening.
Yeah. Unlike last time, all plans are on this time, so we are ready to proceed. You will note, for the new member that wasn't here last time, the plan is plus that was a drafting I made, and a portion of the detention pond ended up on their property. So we've reached an agreement with them to revise the property line between the two, and that's what this plan is for.
Great,
The
thank you.
detention pond will all end up on the homeowners association.
And it's all agreeable to? Any questions from Mr. Schmidt? And you have,
Sure.
you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, as the developer's engineer indicated, is that there was a discrepancy between the location of the fence that was drawn on the plans versus what was actual. His team went out, resurveyed the fence line. The lot line was adjusted to maximize the amount of property that was remaining with the two existing lots. All the rest of the requirements of the township sound that has been met. Our recommendation would be to approve this simple subdivision.
Remedy their fence line and everything?
With a condition upon the engineer's letter dated March 21st, 2024.
Okay, anybody have anything to add on the planning commission? Any comments from the audience on this matter?
I'll make a motion to approve the.
Motion approved by Mr. Taylor.
Contingent on the engineer's letter.
None?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mr. Bloom, all in favor?
Aye.
That one's unanimous.
Thank you, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay. That out of the way, it's time to proceed to our revisitation of the PRD section. I guess we should start off, Mr. Stabler, are you prepared to call
Sure.
rolling on this?
Sure. Again, I want to welcome the new members to the planning commission. We now have a full complement of 5. Each board member at the last meeting was tasked with reviewing the historical information on that, on the PRD ordinance. I can tell you that I've received comments from almost every single planning commission member on this. And having read through everybody's thoughts on it before I let everybody else kind of chirp in a little bit, I want to start off by thanking Kevin for putting together what I'll call the red line version. And if you don't mind, I'll just kind of summarize a little bit what I saw in it. So what Kevin did is he went back and took the latest draft that we had and basically restructured it to a large extent. And in the words of Jeff Kurt, I made it flow better, I believe. there's some things in there I think we need to discuss as a board, but the majority of it, I like how it now flows. And my suggestion would be, is that going forward, that we start off with Kevin's restructured plan. Because what I did was I basically went back and looked at our versions in that word, the current version from the planning commission and what he had done. And almost item for item, it's still in there. Obviously, there's some additional paragraphs that were added by Kevin. Lot of red. But putting that aside, like I said, I think what I would recommend to the planning commission at this point is that we take Kevin's version, basically get rid of the red, and then what we should do then is to take Dan's comments, Pete's comments, and Preston's, and then start to incorporate those into this document. Would be my 2 cents on it. And at that point, I'm just going to let each one of the board members, if there was some specific item that you wanted to talk about, if you do, great. If not, that's fine. What I think I would ask you to task Gavin, myself, and Jeff to do is to take Kevin's version, turn it into a working document, and then interject Dan's and Pete's and everybody else's into that document, and then present it at the next meeting.
So basically, you're saying, everybody will have a chance to submit their comments, and we're basically gonna reformulate it rather than trying to get
That's a good word, reformative.
approved tonight, and then we'll address it again at the next meeting.
And then what we'll do is we'll have this out like a week or 2 before the next plan commission, so that each board member can see how their individual comments were incorporated or not incorporated into the newest or the latest version. That would be my suggestion as far as moving forward.
So are you saying that like you and Jeff would get together, take our comments and put them into this version?
Or put them off to the side,
We want to decide or whatever, and then we can bring them up and say, we like that one or we don't like that one.
Or discard or whatever, yeah.
Exactly, and then hopefully Preston will be here too,
Yeah.
and you'll have a full complement, Mr.
I
Chairman.
haven't seen any comments from Preston.
Well, I realize that.
But you wouldn't decide which comments to put in there, you put all the comments in.
Yeah, we'll just start off with, my suggestion, we'll take Kevin's version, and then we'll take Gavin's, Jeff, and Mike's version and make it a new red line. And then off to the side in this gray area, we would interject where everybody's kind of comments would fit in. And that way, at the next meeting, we could sit there and say, okay, in the first paragraph, Pete thought this, Dan thought this, we thought this, let's agree on something, move forward. And that way, hopefully at the end of the next meeting, which will last a little bit longer, we'll have I'm gonna say like a 95% judgment.
Sounds agreeable.
Well, I do think it reads better, kind of changes, it's a little bit more useful. What I'm used to seeing in terms of how PRD would be doing, so I'd be in favor.
Sounds good to me.
Agreeable? Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, the comments I made on this for the audience's benefit are, having listened to everybody's concerns about PRDs over the last, 32 years now, tried to make adjustments that would eliminate those types of concerns. And every time I go through this thing, I do think of a few additional things I'd like to do, so then I'll probably send more comments than what we have here, including some things that I think we discussed in past meetings that just didn't make it into the final draft. Either the one we had before or
Agreed.
Kevin, so I'll put those back in. One other thing, I think when we read through the revised version, we need to keep in mind anything that's even possibly ambiguous, we need to make sure we tighten that up. Because what'll happen is, one of the old versions said a PRD had to be harmonious with the surrounding area. Now, I don't think it's in there anymore, but harmonious to the neighbor who lives in a single-family residence means a it's gonna be single-family residence. But to a developer, it says, well, it's a residential building, so therefore it's harmonious. We need to eliminate
Very
those kinds of
subjective.
things, because what happens, we'll end up before some judge, which may or may not agree with what our township's intent was. So we need to be very careful. So when you read through it, be sure to really look at those kinds of things. And Kevin, I did, a couple of places, I think you did a pretty good job of being consistent. But I did spot a couple, maybe I'll send you an email and just say, on page so-and-so, you want to change this. That'll be my comments for now. Peter?
Yeah, I think, we're pretty much the same. I mean, my overall goal here would be to not make PRDs absolutely and positively prevented in the township, make them completely impractical, but to tighten up the standards further, than what's been proposed. And, particularly from a density standpoint, and from an open space standpoint, tightening that. That's sort of generally where I'm coming from.
That reminds me, just in general, my comments, what I did, I took the current comprehensive plan and took portions out of there and said, this is what supports having PRDs in the township. Things like having open space in the township, something else, for having a variety housing. You know, I know there's people agitating their new comprehensive plan, but during my time, there's been at least 2 different comprehensive plans. Both of those had those statements. People in Indiana Township like open space in their developments. They also like to have a little more diversity of housing. So therefore, you know, like those of us who are getting older and want to move to a retirement type thing, have an opportunity, or those of us who have children who want to live in Allegheny Town or Indiana Township, but can't afford $500,000 home up front, they're just starting on their careers. We have something that will satisfy all their needs. And one of the big concerns that we always seem to hear anytime the development, it doesn't matter what kind of development, whether it's a PRD or a straight one is, it's going to lower my property values. Unfortunately, experience has shown that does not happen. If anything, it raises it, because as more people come into the township and they see what a nice place this is to live, that actually brings more people in. And as their family grows, they want to upgrade to a larger home, whatever. So your property values hopefully would always increase, and not be like the city of Pittsburgh going through right now with the downtown office buildings. I'm done. Hopefully, maybe.
That's all right, no, that's all right,
But-
no, that's what we're here for, Dan, no problem at all. We welcome your input. Boone, you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I think, overall.
Wait till we get next time.
Yeah, overall, that's just sort of generally my approach to this, but, there's been a proposal to eliminate PRDs, for example, from District 5.
Yes.
Based on, voting district boundaries. In talking to our solicitor and thinking about that otherwise, I'm just not sure that's a great idea. Those voting district lines can change. They're subject to variance based on census, et cetera. I don't think that's a particularly practical way to approach that, but I think we should try and encourage PRDs in certain areas based on their characteristics, the topography, et cetera, and very much discourage them potentially in other areas. To make it more, what's the density like now in a particular area? What's the topography? What are those kinds of characteristics, rather than just doing it based on voting district. So.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
Sure. Well, for the benefit of the audience, I appreciate the comments from the other planning commission members. What I tried to do with my attempt at revising the ordinance was 4 things. I worked with this ordinance probably 6 or 7 years ago for a project that never was built. It was approved, it just was never built. And we found the ordinance difficult to work with just on a
practical basis because it intermingled standards and criteria with process requirements. So you had parts of the ordinance that you had to look at, and then if you really wanted to check something, you had to go someplace else in the ordinance. So what I tried to do was pull all the standards and criteria to the front of the ordinance and put all the process requirements, the steps you have to take to get approved, behind that, so that it might be a little bit more user-friendly, and I think that's what Jeff is referring to in terms of how the ordinance flows. I did think the ordinance draft was a little deficient in terms of laying out intent in particular and standards and criteria. On this point, I agree wholeheartedly with Dan. The problem with ambiguity in an ordinance, and I typically represent developers, is that developers take advantage of ambiguities. You know, the law in Pennsylvania is that if an ordinance is ambiguous, if it can be interpreted more than one way, then the courts have said then you have to give an interpretation that's favorable to the property owner or the developer. So I do agree we need to be careful with ambiguity. I tried to address that, but 4 or 5 more sets of eyes on this would be great, because I'm reading through it again this afternoon myself. There were some things that I would have probably done a little bit differently. One issue that comes up frequently with PRDs in my experience is the supervisor's ability to grant waivers and modifications. So what I tried to do was put some criteria in place for when a waiver or modification could be approved. And the model I was looking at was sort of a combination of the standards for a variance before the zoning hearing board and a waiver and modification to a SALDO requirement. But I do think it's important that an applicant who's requesting a waiver or modification present some justification for it, and that the board be satisfied that it's the least modification required to achieve relief. Oftentimes, you'll have developers asking, you know, for the sky and the moon, when all they really need is maybe a couple of feet. So I try to put some parameters on that. And the last thing is, as Dan said, I tried to be consistent, and I probably missed a few, so I appreciate that. In terms of philosophy, I appreciate where Peter's coming from. I think this is a balancing exercise between encouraging housing development in different models and different forms. As a county, as a region, as a nation, we are certainly facing a housing crisis. I think that's apparent every time you open the paper, so we need to be sensitive to providing more housing and providing more housing at different price points. I think, Dan, you're absolutely correct about that. But at the same time, we have to preserve as much as possible the rural character of the township, the habitat, the habitats that we have here that are so vital. Wetlands, I think it's important to preserve those, obviously. So it will be a balancing exercise, and we'll just have to work our way through that. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and just one little clarification where you mentioned waivers and everything. When we spent a considerable amount of time redoing our SALDO, and one of our goals specifically was to really reduce waivers,
Yep.
if not eliminate, but I don't know if that elimination is actually practical. So that was a lot of our goal that we put in to where, let's tighten this thing up, and then you put it in, you follow the rules. We're really not inclined, has been one of part of our goal to reduce, if not eliminate.
Sure.
So, just giving you a little history on that. So.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Going down the line, Gavin, is there anything you'd like to contribute this time?
You know, the only thing I would ask, to maybe while we're here, because it looks like we're gonna get through this portion pretty quickly, and it's a pretty light agenda otherwise, do we wanna have a substantive discussion about density specifically? Do we, I think that's a key issue that's been raised by the public. I know it's something that the commissioners have all, been focused on. And I just don't know if we're at a point where there's consensus as to density, or if we, maybe want to flesh that out a little bit while we're here. I mean, I'm recognizing that, we're going to go through and take the action that Dan Slagle talked about as far as next steps.
Condenser reform.
Right.
Yes. Well, I think we're fairly close last time on density. We're all in the same ballpark, right?
Okay, Gavin, I think what I'd be suggesting is that even if it's a PRD rather than straight development, the overall density for the entire tract should not be any greater than it would be for straight development. So if you'd be allowed to have 20 dwelling units, we'd have 20 dwelling units. The only place where I had a little bit of concern was, okay, what if we allow something like a townhouse in a development where maybe it's not currently allowed? Should we count that as part of the same number of dwelling units, or maybe up it a little bit just because they're basically smaller structures? Okay. And one other thing I thought about, and this wasn't in my document at the time, was possibly putting in minimum square footage for a dwelling unit in the different zoning districts, because I know there's a lot of agitation now for these mini houses, and I'd hate to see a PRD come in with all 400 and 500 square foot houses
That's a
on
good
it.
point, yes.
You know, and then the question is, just say a minimum square footage like 1,200, or if it's MDR, makes 1,200, if it's LDR, it's 2,000, if it's, whatever, RE or whatever, maybe 23,000 or something. So the houses that are being built would be similar in size to the other houses in that zoning district if they were, straight developments.
Yeah, in terms of a minimum dwelling unit size, I agree with that. That's something we should look at.
I think it's nothing that's been out here yet, but I know in the cities they deal with
It's
that.
been talked about.
And, eventually it's gonna come out, and if you read your township news, they talk about it too. And we haven't covered that at all anywhere, and I think we ought to put it in here while we're at it.
I agree with that.
And maybe we also examine the front and the side setbacks, particularly when a PRD, as you pointed out, attaches to an existing development.
Right.
Like Hartwood Meadows. So we eliminate that sort of difference.
All those concerns you
That
had.
difference look. Yeah.
The only caution I would offer is that the fundamental theory of a PRD, I think, is that you encourage developers to preserve more of the natural environment of the parcel in exchange for allowing the developer to have a 1.5, 2, 4, whatever times density on the part that can be developed. So we need to be careful that in constraining lot size or density in a PRD that we're not making it so restrictive that basically nobody will want to do it, because all they're going to do is just do a regular subdivision, and then you lose the benefit of trying to preserve the property you want to preserve.
The buffers, the open space.
Yeah,
less
because I'll just go with
disturbance.
the regular subdivision in that instance. So, I think we need to consider that, and a lot of it has to do, particularly I think in this part of the world, with topography as well. You might have a 10-acre site that you want to preserve 8 of it, but if you're going to preserve that much of it, a bad example, you're going to have to let them do more than just 1 or 2 houses on that.
Yeah, I mean, the total density allowed on that total parcel should basically remain the same, even if you might be packing them in maybe on 1/4 acre lots instead of 1/2 acre lots, or vice versa, or maybe even smaller than 1/4 acre. But we don't want it to look like it's totally different from everything else.
Yeah, and I think I reported on this. I did talk to the planning director up in Marshall Township, who I've known for a number of years. Marshall doesn't have a PRD, they have something what they call a conservation subdivision ordinance, which is kind of a PRD light. And if you follow the rules in Marshall, you can get up to 4 times the density. But Nicole told me that they believe they've preserved 50% more land than they would have otherwise if people had developed things more under their standard subdivision. So, it bears some investigation, but I'm not suggesting any particular numbers. I just think we need to be careful how we do it so that it doesn't become unattractive to people to use as a tool.
So if I could just add to what Kevin just said, one of the comments from one of the planning commission members, I don't really realize, the word bonus was mentioned. Was that you, I don't.
No, I
Kevin,
think it was Dan,
Dan
yeah.
that mentioned it. But I think what you're alluding to, Kevin, is that, let's say right now, we require a minimum of 20% open space. So let's say that because of topography, it's such a bastard lot, that he actually ends up preserving 40%. But you would give him the opportunity to compress the lots into a smaller area because he's providing more open space. But, so I don't know if you wanna think about that, is that if we provide some type of bonus structure that, if you do 30% open space, you can go up to like 1.1 times the density. If you go up to 40%, you can get some kind of formula like that, I mean, if he does 80% of all woodland, it starts to compress it that way. Something to think about. So the more open space or woodland that he preserves, the higher the density. I mean, I wouldn't go nuts. The other thing that I saw kicked around was, I think, at least from my perspective over the past 38 years, it seems like Indiana Township wants to be as much single-family development. That seems to be the type of unit that pleases everybody. Whether it's no basement for us seniors that just wanna walk out and stay on one level, or whether it's a 2 or 3 story structure. So the question is, should you give a bonus or an incentive that if the PRD is nothing but single-family units? I'll use Blue Run Road as Blue Run development, where they're all single-family units. Did the number of units, was it excessive there? No. That particular development's gonna have the same flavor as a standard subdivision, to be honest with you. But, I mean, how you structure this ordinance, you can get a developer thinking more single-family or more multifamily, depending on what incentives you give him, as I think Kevin was alluding to in the Marshall PRD. So give some thought as to a bonus structure, give some thought to increase open space, and give some thought as to whether you want to encourage a particular style or not.
Do you know, so if we increase the open space requirement to 30% to match Hampton and some of the other surrounding areas, do you know if they build in that kind of flexibility that you were just talking about?
I do not, I'd have to investigate that.
Just curious.
But as Kevin alluded to too, is that there's a certain threshold with developers, that if you make it so onerous, because keep in mind is that the big difference to a developer between a subdivision and a PRD is 2 public hearings. Well, it's gonna be multiple public hearings, but it's like going through the gauntlet for these guys. I mean, and don't get me wrong, public hearings are a good thing, especially with something new and innovative like a PRD. But the amount of money expended by a developer and a township for stenographers and lawyers, because no offense to Gavin and his group there, but with a straight subdivision, we don't need lawyers. But except for the developers agreement, of course, and I'm just having fun, Gavin. But in the case of a PRD, as you witnessed over the past 3 or 4 that we've had here, there's a lot of back and forth and that type of thing. So there's a certain threshold where a developer is just gonna go straight subdivision.
So, Dan, speaking of ambiguity, I want to be sure I'm hearing you correctly. So, do you consider multifamily to be like a 4-plex, 3 townhouses together, or is that single family? And the reason I ask that question, in my world, a 4-plex, 4 units connected, a quad, a 3-unit townhouse is still single family, because each of those are, that's multifamily in your world. Okay.
Anything 3 and over.
Okay.
Yeah, as soon as it becomes attached, it's either a duplex or a multifamily.
Okay.
But I agree with Kevin, basically
disagreeing with Dan. I don't like the 20 for 20, because I think we're just gonna hurt development. I mean, there's ways we can structure this to be, you know, willing to look at all the facts, because I just think, like a 20 for 20 deal, Dan, I think it's gonna hurt development, because PRDs are the thing. They are more popular than multi-subdivisions, because if we give PRDs up, we're gonna lose the open space, you're gonna lose the input of the public.
The buffering.
Buffers, you're gonna lose it, it's just gonna be wall-to-wall lot lines, and they're gonna go in there and cut all their trees down. So I think there should be some incentive for the developer to want to do those PRDs, maybe 25% of that number. I'm just saying, if it's 20 on a multi, you know, maybe 25 on a PRD. Maybe our number, we need to look at this table, 3A for sure, or 4A, and structure that tighter, obviously.
And you're absolutely right, Jeff, is that if you go with a straight subdivision, every piece of property that's not the roadway, right-of-way, or the detention basin is somebody's property.
Yep.
And when that happens, the developer will basically clear cut everything, border to border. And that's the really, to me, that's the biggest downfall to a straight subdivision, is that stream that's running through there, that's on somebody's property now.
And it's where the homeowners might not want that, cause you got, what, prime cliff or floodplain or something like that.
Well, that's true too, there might be a wetland in the back or whatever the case may be, but you mean, you're selective as to which lot, but all those natural resources now do no longer belong to a homeowners association or the township or the township as a whole. It now belongs to somebody. And like I said, it's at any area that's not a wetland or a subdivision plan, all those trees are coming down.
We have no control over it.
In the subdivision plan, yeah, I mean, it's, now, what we did to correct that is we created a environmental and conservation fund fee. So the more trees you cut down, the more you donate to the township as a deterrent for a developer
But
coming in.
that's for the developer, that doesn't affect the homeowner, correct?
But,
They could cut
Well,
down
it
the
affects them in
trees.
the end when their costs get driven up.
but, and the same.
No, but I mean, the homeowner can remove trees without,
Oh, yeah.
Well, a
and-
multi-subdivision, correct.
But it, I mean, that was the idea of it, is to create it as a deterrent. I mean, I can't say that openly out in the public, but I guess we are in the public, but the point of the matter is
the cat's out of the bag. That's it.
hi, everybody. I mean, that's, what we purposely did there is to create a deterrent. And the backside of that conservation environmental fund fee is, in the case of, Richmont Estates, I mean, it was an $80,000 check that the contractor cut to the township, so that we can in turn plant trees someplace else to reforest other things. Because one of the things we found out in Richmont Estates, for instance, we had these one tree in the front, two in the back type of thing, and I get calls and it's like, well, I wanna cut my tree down, I just wanna mow my grass, I don't want a tree in my front yard. So, you know, you get stuck with trying to reforest an area versus somebody who just wants a lawn. And I can tell you that the pine tree I had in my front yard got cut down. And about the 10 that were in the backyard all got cut down.
People want pools, gardens, things of that nature.
Sure, so, I mean, in there, as everybody's talking about, there's a balance. And that's
And a trade-off.
a trade-off of balance, sure. I mean, I think we did a great job, the planning commission did a great job in the Saldo in putting some of these, you know, vehicles in there, whether it's an impact fee. But as Jeff just mentioned, is that you take that $80,000, the developer's just gonna till that right back into the price. And instead of the house costing $425, it's $450. So who really gets hurt but the person buying the house?
Yeah.
Well, my suggestion, and I offer this with a little trepidation since I'm the junior guy here, would be for Dan and Jeff to take a look at some of the other townships ordinances around us, and see how they handle the density question, and maybe incorporate some of those ideas into what we're proposing. And you can footnote it so we know where it came from, and
Yeah,
range
I like
or
that
something.
idea.
A rural range, we could.
Right. Yeah, we can do that.
And some of that work Mr. Capone has already done for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those documents, I don't think, if Kevin, if you have not received those, there's a nice little report that Mr. Capone
Okay.
did some.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's long
Helpful
comparisons.
research. He's sort of a de facto almost, planning commissioner with his, I think he spends as much time as anybody else, working on planning commission
I
items, so
think
it's,
it's fair.
yeah, he's
So-
provided some valuable input over the years.
Along that line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's a comparison of O'Hara Township. Let me give you 7, so Preston gets one. I mean, that's the O'Hara Township, comparison. And just to, as it's going down there, if you flip to the last page of it in yellow, our current saldo at an MDR is 21. In the current PRD structure we have is 26, and I think O'Hara's would be 16. But give that a read. It's O'Hara's one is really hard to decipher. But I think we took it the way it is. But take a look at it. Not today, but at your leisure.
Could I make a request? You know, when you put together this document with everybody's comments, could you get it out to us at least a week in advance of the meeting, especially for those people who are still working? I mean, I have all day I can read it, but I'm sure these folks would appreciate having a little more time to digest it. Because it's not the thing you read through once and say, oh yeah, that's right.
It's not the
that's
easiest
wrong.
read,
You
right?
gotta kind
No,
of
it's not.
think about it and go back and read it a second or third time before you're
Well,
ready
I'd
to
like to tell you yes, but the world doesn't work that way sometimes. We'll do the best we can. But
Yeah,
that's
other
why,
responsibilities.
as I said in an email to Peter, and you were all in that, you know, if we're 3 days out, we'll talk about it briefly here. Now you guys can take the next month and look at this input that we have on the table in front of us and come up with more comments. We'll get them out as fast as we can, Dan, you know how things go. So,
Who has the master red version?
well, I have an email, you mean from Kevin?
That we can get it and change it? Is the red line version?
I can send you a Word document, if that would.
That'd be good.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just send that to Jeff and then he can.
Distribute it, yeah.
That would be great.
So we also need someone who has the knowledge of what to do with the red version.
Well, I'll send it, I can send it both ways.
Come on,
No,
Dan.
I'm just kidding. I have people that, it's definitely got a good meaning.
Okay. We're good on everything. Okay, at this time, we can take, public comments. Anybody cares to speak, please, raise your hand, step to the podium, one at a time. Okay, Chris, you got the floor.
Well, you want me to be the timekeeper, what are we, 5 minutes?
Okay, Chris Capone, 66 Windsor Court. Well, thank the board, especially Mr. McKeegan, for the work he's done. Sounds good. First question I had was, when do we think the public would be able to review this in the site? Well, I realize, you know, I'm not asking right now, but looking ahead, give me an idea when that would.
I'm gonna say May, probably June at the latest, but like Jeff said, is that nothing is, so that's a rough number? So probably June-ish.
Okay. I think there was value, like last time around, when you were able to put out the draft with the red lines for people to look at, I think that was beneficial to do that rather than waiting for us to go through the whole review process and then find out that no one liked it. So a couple of just general comments. Mr. Slade, you mentioned the O'Hara ordinance. I think like what they achieved is okay, but my personal assessment was it was unnecessarily complex and difficult to read, was just my general impression.
Agreed.
So I don't know if I'd necessarily hold that up as a standard to follow.
think there's much land available for development in Ira Township either.
Yeah, down by the
Little
river,
bit,
it's like, some things have really expanded rapidly down there. A couple other things, a couple other comments. One thing, as you gentlemen read through this, simplicity, I think, is good. I know like the previous draft had, I wouldn't say it's overly complex, but there's some complications where you have like buffer zones trying to achieve a certain density by factoring in buffer areas and other things. And I think like a very simple formula tends to be better because there's fewer loopholes, there's less things that could go wrong. When you start using complex formulas, you wind up in a situation where, oh, it works for like a 10-acre development, but when you get the 100-acre development, you get a completely different outcome. So simplicity, I think, is something we should try to strive for, just a suggestion. In terms of like what the community is looking for, I think one thing, very high level, I think the community is kind of looking for what we call predictability or consistency. And I think that's why a lot of people really objected to the PRD process that we have here, is that you might be in an MDR zone or LDR zone, and you look around and say, oh, okay, everyone has half-acre lots, and then all of a sudden someone come in and they can build a PRD that has an average lot size of like 8,000 square feet. And I think that's what really upset like a lot of the residents, was like, they were sort of blindsided by the fact that, oh, I bought this house, and now all of a sudden someone else can come in and pack in, an apartment building or something else next door. And I think that's something people are looking for. And the last thing, I don't think we mentioned, I didn't hear any discussion today, and Mr. Taylor, I think you brought this up a while ago. One of the things we should keep in mind, and I think this might actually wind up being implemented with front setbacks, but is the whole parking issue. I know like the draft, there were some things in there where you could have a 15-foot front setback in some cases, at least one version of the draft had that. And when you figure that out, and you say, okay, the street's actually wider than the paved area. So I have a 13-foot wide easement along the street that belongs to the township. But I then subtract off the sidewalk requirement. So if you look at the Saldo and so on, this is we have a 3-foot grass area and then a 4-foot wide sidewalk. So that leaves me with like, 6 feet or something, and I add that on to the 15 feet, and now I'm at 21 feet. And I go around my neighborhood and I look at all the people that have Ford F-150s and Chevy Suburbans and whatever, and there is not enough room, or really it's like 6 inches for them to park the vehicle in front of the house. And I would tell you, I have several people in my neighborhood say, oh, well, that does not fit in my garage, right? So they have no choice but to park in front. So that's something else we may consider, is just the parking. Another something that sort of came out of like Richmond Estates is the houses are all close together, no offense, but then it does create a parking problem.
And then townhouses are worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Especially
can't
with people
exactly
using
street
their
park
garages as storage.
Yeah.
Which we talked about.
That's very common.
because we don't have attics.
One thing I have seen, so my mother lives in like a quad community nearby, not in Indian Township, but they actually have little parking areas. And like my daughter rents a house in Ross Township, and it's the same thing. She has one spot in front of the townhouse plus a garage, but then 50 feet down, there's a row of 12 spaces that anybody can use, and that's something we may want to consider. So again, I'm not mandating that we should ban the 15-foot front setbacks, or we need a minimum front setback, but that's something that does sort of tie into all of this. If you have a short front setback, maybe it's compensated by providing off-street parking, or something. That's just something else to think about as you go through this. And again, I appreciate your effort, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi. Landis Miller, 2022 Olive Tree Drive, and I just want to echo what Chris said about parking. We have 25-foot setbacks in my neighborhood. You're trying to attract families. Families come with children. Children grow up and drive. We added extra asphalt so we could park 3 cars in our driveway, but a lot of families in our neighborhood could not. So I really think you should carefully consider the parking situation, and especially when it comes to townhomes. The townhome owners don't even have the benefit of being able to park on the street because their driveways are closer together than the length of a car. So we have a real recipe for parking disaster in our neighborhood, and basically have a neighborhood where you can't have a birthday party for your kid without clogging up the entire neighborhood. So I think that is good to note. you know, Dan, I know, Dan Taylor, you had mentioned about, you know, families moving in and they don't wanna spend $500,000 on a house or can't, but that's what we did spend in our PRD, which is still currently under construction. So, I think we're trying to, in our minds, justify some of the PRDs by saying that they're building affordable housing. They're not building affordable housing. And, the comment about open space and trying to have a formula for open space, if the open space is not buildable, it's also not usable by residents, and I think the point of having open space is for residents to be able to access it. Our particular neighborhood has no open space other than detention basins that can be publicly accessed. Well, and those can't be publicly accessed because they're fenced. And so I wish you would take that into consideration as well. And then, the last comment I just wanna make, is around the fence that, was spoken about earlier for the detention basin. I just wanted to point out that I was the resident who brought it to the township's attention that, the private homeowner property was down in the middle of the detention basin. And I was treated with pushback on that resulted in Mr. Slagle forwarding my email to the developer, who then threatened to take legal action against me personally for bringing that up. So, I feel like if you're inviting this kind of development into our community, you have a responsibility to protect the people that are buying it. The developer is not the person that lives here and pays taxes. So please consider that, and please do not forward homeowners' private contact information to developers. Thank you.
Yeah, I think your concerns about the open space and what the usability of it, something I've been thinking about as well. And, you know, cause we have so many where, okay, if we can't build on that lot, then we'll make it open space. And that's the wrong approach that we need to address in this revision.
And if you maintain the lot sizes and don't do a formula to expand open space, then you also preserve the size of the yards and the space that these people have to live and raise their families. If you allow a greater density for more open space, that does nothing for the people that end up buying the homes.
Yeah, and that's, the member of the planning commission who's not here is involved with real estate, so that he'd be a good person to, you know, advise the rest of us on what sells and what doesn't sell. You know, what are families looking for when they move into a development?
And our development sold very quickly, but if you surveyed the 48 or 49 people who purchased single-family homes, we would have all preferred a subdivision. I would have spent a couple $100,000 more to have a decent-sized lot. But the only thing currently available in our township is 20 acres or a postage stamp in a PRD.
I mean, to talk about her point, I mean, when you look at Richmond Estates, all three sides, both sides and the rear, are steep slopes. To your point about open space, so to create open space on the flat portions means you tighten things up even more, and we're already talking about parking problems as it is now, currently as it sits. So that would only make it worse to have usable open space. I mean, it is Western Pennsylvania, topography's tough, and, you know, they are allowed to take advantage of those areas. It doesn't mean you can't walk them. Yeah, it's not a football field, but I think they do the best they can with what they have, honestly.
We can't walk it, we're fenced out of it. And half of my lot is essentially detention facilities. It is a steep slope that's not walkable, leading to a detention basin. So I think that should be addressed as well. What is sold to the homeowners, the lots that are made, should be accessible by the homeowner.
Just so you know, it's in the sound though, it has been addressed.
Good.
Anyone else?
Donna Lovelace, 32 Oaknall Drive. One quick comment, you mentioned how we made the developers pay money for the trees that they were preserving and cutting down. But then you left out the part about the developers getting a 90% discount. I'd like to get a 90% discount on anything I buy.
For what would that be?
Pardon me?
90% for what?
The fee they had to pay for the trees, they requested was too much, and so that was discounted.
Well, they never requested the Board of Supervisors acted on that.
Even worse, and I guess that brings me to my next point. For the two people who may not have been, or probably were not at any of the supervisor meetings, if you could take some snippet of time to listen to what really happens at these supervisors meeting, where the citizens come repeatedly and are treated with disdain in some cases, disrespect, and really absolute, what we ask for is disregarded. And we ask for why people are making, why three of the supervisors are making their decision, and they're just kind of stone-faced, and there's never an answer. If you could give me a justification, even if I don't like it, well, then I have an answer. But, please, just take a little time and listen to what really happens at these meetings, so that you as a body can act with integrity and represent the citizens. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Linda Massarelli, 5 Pine Creek Drive. I just want to say how disappointed I am that the 3 members of the Board of Supervisors, along with Mr. Anderson and Mr. Kurdai, and the members of this commission who knew last month that Mrs. Lucchino was going to be resigning, we were at the meeting, no one said a word about that. The
Okay,
public,
stop right there, that's not what the
Okay.
planning commission.
you couldn't tell us at the meeting? Last month at the planning commission,
That was all after the fact. I don't understand what the problem is. I had a meeting with Sarah Hertwig and gave her a heads up prior to that meeting that she was showing signs that she was gonna leave. Okay, and I told her to get a hold of Chris Capone, which she never did. I got a hold of Chris Capone at the meeting before that and gave him a heads up to submit a letter. This all came out at the last supervisors meeting. So I don't know why you're bringing it up. It's like a dog and pony show.
I know that, I'm just saying, it doesn't seem very democratic that the people in the audience, the people in the township don't know what's going
That's
on.
not true. I asked Chris at the meeting. You were there.
Did
Okay?
you wanna be on this board?
I submitted an application, yes. And Mr. Kurdai did tell me, once the vacancy occurred, he informed me the vacancy was available, and I did submit an application, correct. And then, that's what the supervisors voted on at their most recent meeting.
And we called Chris, and we felt, after reviewing it, that Kevin was more qualified. So let's get off of that and move on. Chris was notified. I like Chris. If Kevin wouldn't have submitted, Chris would have been the guy.
All I'm saying is, the township residents don't feel like we know what's going on. Until we see the agenda the day before a meeting, we don't even know
Well, that's policy that
anything.
you have to take up with the manager. I contacted Chris personally.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Anyone else?
I guess I'm the last one.
Yeah.
Chris Marzik, 325 Guys Run. Mr. brought up a excellent point about density. I think bottom line is density, right? Like any development, any territory, you want to be concerned about density, how many people are moving in. So what's the consensus definition for density? Like how would you define it?
I think that's part of the discussion.
Units.
I think it's usually based on the acreage divided by the number of units, but it's more complicated than that when you take into account open space and buffers and stormwater retention, so it's not an easy question to answer.
Can I just say a couple words on it? When you talk about density, so let's start at the beginning. So we have a comprehensive plan that's gone through about 2 or 3 different versions at this particular point. The comprehensive plan in general terminology provides a certain idea or concept of the flavor of a community, okay? From the comprehensive plan, the next thing that comes out of it is the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance dictates the type of structures you want, the density in those areas, and from that, a zoning map is prepared.
I just wanna know what,
Just let me
what,
finish.
what units are you
Give me-
using for
give
the
me-
word
Give me
density?
2 minutes, give me 2 minutes, and I try to answer your question, so that everybody understands it too. So from the zoning map, density is put on all the different parts of the different township in accordance with the comprehensive plan. And each one of those zones that are created has a certain density associated with it. Now, that gives every township resident the opportunity to develop their property in an orderly fashion in accordance with the density set forth in all those different zones, all right? Now, from that zoning map, the Saldo is produced. The Saldo gives a blueprint as to how that development is actually constructed, nuts and bolts if you wanna think of it that way. So it's a 3-stage process to answer your question as far as density. If you were to sit there and develop every piece of property in the township in accordance to the density that's prescribed in it, we'd probably have 100,000 people here. But it doesn't happen that quick, and I can tell you, in my 38 years as the engineer here, is that we had a flurry of development back in, when it was 1982, and it wasn't until the past 3 years that there was another flurry. But until then, Indiana Township was basically dormant.
It's not that difficult of a question.
Can I I think I know what you're asking. So if you open up the zoning ordinance and you open up the subdivision land development ordinance, they define density, the word density the same way.
Very
That's
good.
what
What
you're
is
asking, right? The definition is the number of dwelling units per unit of land. So depending upon, I think the reason Gavin and Mr. Slagle are being a little bit sensitive to this is that per unit of land can vary from zoning district to zoning district. It can vary from requirement to requirement. So you can have a number of dwelling units per acre, a number of dwelling units per square feet, a number of but it's a number of dwelling units per something, per unit of land.
If you go online and research the word density, almost all the time, it's number of people per square mile.
Well,
Population.
that's population density. We're dealing with building density, I guess maybe that's the better way to put it.
So there's 2 different types of density. We need to define terms if we're going to address the numbers.
The zoning ordinance defines the density, like in an MDR district, it's 2 dwelling units per acre. In an LDR district, it's 1 dwelling unit per acre. If it's agricultural, it's 1 dwelling unit for 3 acres. That's the minimum you can have. You can have more, you can have more acreage.
Okay, that's a better answer.
Right, but that's all defined in the zoning code. Each zoning district has a density of allowable dwelling units until you get it down into industrial, then it's a little bit different.
But it's not overall population.
No, it has nothing to do with population.
When I hear density, you wouldn't assume that that's what you're talking about when you go define density of Indiana Township. Do you know what that number is, population density of our township?
The zoning, our codes don't regulate population density.
It's around 7,200.
It's 400, about 400 people per square mile.
Whatever.
We don't regulate that.
No.
We regulate dwelling units.
In your 38 years in Indiana Township, that number hasn't changed much. That number,
I don't know.
number of people per square mile in a 17.7 square miles that is Indiana Township.
Yeah, I don't know what the population was 38 years ago.
It wasn't, like you were saying, it's not that different.
I mean, I can tell you right now, it's about 7,000 something.
Well, if you do the math, it's about, so over 400 people per square
And in the
mile.
last 10 years, I think we gained 1 person.
But that doesn't include my development.
Right, that's because that was
People live in Dodge.
2010 to 2020. We gained 1 person. That was because as Indiana Township matures and ages, there was as many people that were either leaving or us or whatever.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't change much. It's about 400 people per square mile. You're making my point.
Well, in the 1990s, it was around 6,000 residents. So So it has gone up 1,000 roughly.
I mean, I can give you
30
a
years.
ballpark.
But I
So-
guess, what's your concern? When
My
you're
concern
talking
is-
density of population, I mean, I don't
Right.
understand what the concern is.
Because the way I look at density is population density, number of people per square mile. That is directly what affects traffic congestion, strain on schools, strain on services, public services. Would you not agree?
But we as a township, this board in particular, we can't control how many people move into the township. You buy a house, we can't say there's only 2 people allowed in that house. We can't say there can't be 10 people in that house. The only thing we can say is there has to be some kind of relationship amongst those people in order to occupy a single family dwelling.
Right, but empirical historical data, that number doesn't change much. It does, the population density of Indiana Township has not changed much in the 60 years that I've been here.
Okay, so
People per square mile.
since I've been here, we've added 1,500 dwelling units. So,
My concern is the people.
let me just, okay, so 1,500, and right now, there's about 2.6 people per.
Very good, so that's the number per
So-
dwelling that you would expect, 2.6
So-
people per dwelling?
Yeah, that's what the
Okay.
census says. So,
Okay.
we've added 4,000 people to Indiana Township since I've been your engineer.
Sounds high.
4,000.
That sounds high.
But that's the 2010
Can I
census.
interject something here?
Because they didn't do a census in 2010.
We can't, and when I say we, I mean government generally, can't regulate family size, okay?
That's not my
No,
question.
No.
It's-
You're-
That's
you're-
irrelevant.
You're absolutely correct that number of people drives traffic, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
We can't directly regulate the number of people, okay? All we can directly regulate are buildings.
Well, if you make a 3-story garden-style apartment building, that would regulate how many people are in that
It- it-
square mile.
It would,
So you do have a direct effect on,
but if you're asking us to say you have to limit or you have to allow, we can't do that.
no, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you to define terms and then see if there's some sort of guideline to, if it's 2.6 per dwelling and you're putting so many dwellings on so many square miles, that all shifts to basic math, no? You wouldn't consider those numbers as something to look at even?
That's not the way the industry structures things.
Well,
I don't think it's the way the law structures things.
I know that, I know it's not.
I mean, again,
Okay,
I'll
well-
try again. If a family moves into this township that has 10 people living in it, the way the township defines family, there's nothing we can do about that if they're in a legal building, okay? So we can't regulate family size, we can only regulate the number of buildings that are built in this. in
but
this
those are
township.
related.
They are related, but if you're asking us to put
No, I'm
something.
not asking you to regulate family size, no.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your point.
What are you asking?
What are you asking then?
I'm asking whether the consideration for dwellings per square mile is considered as, to translate into how many people are gonna be in that. Obviously, the less dwellings, the less people. Those numbers are directly related.
So what the US Census Bureau does is that every 10 years, there's a census that's taken as required by the federal constitution. And in that, they trend how growth either increases or decreases for each municipality across the Commonwealth and across the whole.
And that's defined as people per square mile. That's what the census gives you. It doesn't give you dwelling, it doesn't. Anyway, my question was to define the terms, and it was difficult to do. So, it's just something that,
Structures per acre.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, I might just add, since I had eight children, we were 10 in our home, so I'm glad I wasn't kept out of the township.
Sorry, Peter. May I ask a question, I guess in response to Mr. Capone's comments? And Jeff, I don't want to add to your burdens, but, by next meeting, we ought to be able to put up on these screens, not the ordinance, but maybe some bullet points that would
All
help
right.
discussing. Is that technically possible?
I guess,
Not for me, but I could
Not at this time.
certainly lean on
Okay,
somebody.
all right.
I need to talk.
the only concern I have about, you know, if there's not consensus on some of the points, I hate to kind of mislead the public
Okay.
as to which way we're going. Now, I think I think as this thing sort of solidifies, I don't see any problem, you know, doing that to kind of lead the discussion. I don't think we'll be in a position next month to get this out of here.
Couldn't it be marked as draft?
Pardon me?
Couldn't it be marked as draft if it's
We're
publicized?
not gonna circulate a draft if it's gonna change, if there's gonna be 50 changes in it, and then we have people spending their time worried about things that are never gonna come to fruition. That's why we don't circulate drafts.
So the red line one that's on the website now is marked draft on every
Yes,
page.
well, that was one that was made public, and, yeah, we tried to be, you know, transparent, or whatever you wanna call it, to get the word out as to what those changes would be considered. But I think because this sausage is still, I think, needs another meeting or two to be made, I don't wanna direct people and say, oh, what do we do with this new density? And these, you know, we have 5 people up here who say, I would never approve that density, so, I think we're gonna sort of do this in steps, and we'll make it public as it makes sense.
And Mr. Rob, can you kind of define the process from that point then? This group comes up with a final draft, it's open for public comment, or it goes to the supervisors for public comment, or?
So technically, the time that the draft becomes legally public, the first time the township is required to make it public is when the township board of supervisors votes to schedule a public hearing. Now, before that time, the township does have options to make it public at various stages. I don't think those decisions have been made yet on this particular path.
Well, case in point is that the draft that was presented from the planning commission was reviewed by the supervisors and sent back to the planning commission, which is where we are right now. So what everybody would have looked at was kind of a moot point anyways.
Yeah, that is a good example, Dan. This, as folks will recall, this planning commission comprised of different people, spent a lot of time on a prior amendment to this ordinance, finally felt like it was out of here, sent it off. The board looked at it and said, nope, try again, and, you know, here we are again, trying to get through it. So hopefully, we're more successful this time around.
Well, I look forward to the new board, 2 new members, or 3, Preston, who's not here, that's why I looked. But, I look forward to the future, what we have.
The other comment, Dan, a question for you, again, responding to something Mr. Capone said. I do agree that providing parking, particularly where you have short driveways and you're impeding pedestrians in particular, can be an issue.
Me, Dan?
Pardon me?
Yeah, which Dan? Me, Dan?
I'm sorry, you, Dan. It's a question for you, Mr. Slagle. So if we're gonna, let me just finish my question, is this.
Just call me Slag.
Slagle. If we are going to consider allowing in PRDs off-lot parking areas, so to speak, could I put a word in for having those be pervious, not impervious areas? In other words, let's try to make them so they're not just spitting water off.
And that's part of what we went through when we reworked the saldo.
Yep.
Those were all considerations. It's hard by nature to do a one size fits
Right.
all.
Definitely.
Because we did have a lot of concerns raised about impervious surfaces in
Yep.
general, impacting stormwater and
Yep.
all that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, if you could, have parking, but not necessarily on asphalt.
Right, thank you.
I'm sorry, may I ask one more question? Was there any allowance made in the new draft, that made any changes to the number of entrances and exits that are required? Because that's one other real pain point for us right now. You can't get in and out of our neighborhood when the school bus is about to pick up, because there's 20 cars deep down both sides of the road.
That's addressed in the south end,
Okay.
and it is addressed.
Can you explain a little bit how?
Is it
I know
encouraged,
you
50 or more, it's
love
encouraged,
lengthy
and 100 more it's required, am I remembering that right?
Right, so and again, don't quote me here, I do too many municipalities and too many ordinances, but I believe in Indiana Township saldo, it says that if it's 50 houses or less, a secondary access is encouraged. If it's,
100, I think.
I'm sorry,
Something.
maybe 50 to
100.
100 is encouraged, over 100, it's, I think it's required.
Yeah, and I just think, you know, in terms of our neighborhood, that maybe seems to be still problematic out
So
there.
you're like 95.
98, 97.
But then again, your development, as I explained before, where would you put a second entrance in your development specifically?
I don't know, but I would
That
make.
would
the-
be
I would
acceptable to the township
perhaps
to take
make the
over.
entrance wide enough that people could
Well,
still
that's a
get to
good
work
point,
when the
and
bus is picking up.
That's a good point, because I saw Kevin's draft, Kevin, you had mentioned, made a comment about, is that too narrow, the 50-foot rule? Maybe that's something we need to look at as well. I'm not saying we could get 2 entrances safely in 100-foot, but, you know, we do need to look at that 50-foot frontage situation for PRDs. So, yeah, we'll talk about that further.
Yeah, the school seems to think our cul-de-sacs are too narrow to turn around a school bus, so.
That would be negative.
Okay, I
Those-
figured if a fire truck fits a
Those
school
are
bus.
80-foot
should.
diameters, cul-de-sacs
Okay,
for, designed for school buses.
so
and
that's
fire
just
trucks.
another board to work on.
Yeah, exactly. We build these roads to specifications to help the school buses, and most of these school buses do not go in these plans, because they don't want to, it's a waste of time. They just want to hit the main roads, pick these kids up and go.
Well, in 2 years, we'll be 70 in one shot, so they just bring the bus in and load it up and leave.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, with that all said, we look forward to the next meeting, and can we get a motion to adjourn?
Before
You
that-
know what, before we do, can I bring up
Something?
a small piece of new business?
Well, there is another item on the agenda too, the annual report.
Oh. I don't know that I ever did.
I asked
It's new
your,
to me as chairman, put it that way.
I asked your wife the same question.
Yeah. Okay, something new. Should I just go down it?
I mean, I think we just have, you just want to acknowledge
Acknowledge
that
it,
it was
yeah,
provided,
okay,
yeah.
that's-
I mean, I think you can maybe describe publicly, it's just it's sort of a list.
Yeah, it's just a report from our planning commission as far as attendance, who was here for how many meetings, and also, a summary of the topics that were covered during the planning commissions in the calendar year 2023.
And all the people that have sixes next to their names, thank you.
Well, Cecil would have given you the gold star back in the day. Okay. Anything else I was missing?
I don't think so, Kevin, I think you're probably aware of under sunshine now, we can't really add anything to the agenda of any substantive deliberation.
No,
You
this
can
is
still
just.
make an announcement.
This is
or-
just an announcement.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I was at a meeting last Tuesday night at Beechwood Farms. And there was a presentation made by some folks speaking on behalf of a program called 10 Million Trees. This is a program that comes out of the Chesapeake Bay area, but it encompasses all of Pennsylvania. And apparently, this offers free trees to municipalities and public bodies throughout the state. And if you've noticed a lot of tree planting in Fox Chapel and O'Hara, apparently those two municipalities grabbed onto this program and were able to get quite a number of basically free trees to plant in their township parks and special areas. So I did have a short conversation with the woman who spoke about it. She'd be excited to work with Indiana Township. I know this is probably more a supervisor's decision than planning commission, but I just wanted to make people aware of it. They are gonna be trying to get a grant sometime this summer, so perhaps support from Indiana Township would be good.
In regards to that, the Parks and Recreation Board has also functions as a tree commission. They're
Yep.
the ones who need to
Okay.
deal with that.
No,
So maybe Jeff or someone
Yeah, if
could
you could
pass it
forward me the
on.
information.
I'll pass the
I can pass it
email
along.
on to you, and then Jeff, maybe you could get to it.
The only thing I would add, Mike, is this approval we made tonight, leave these behind here so that these go to the supervisors. We don't get to keep these.
Yeah, good point, Dan.
It took me a few months to get used to that idea.
Alrighty. Now,
There you go.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
motion by Mr. Taylor, adjourned, second by Mr. Bloom,
Yes.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.